Okay. Well, welcome, guys. So we have about half our audience online tonight, and half in person. And we want to welcome you guys all out tonight to the Community Hub. The Hub is basically a government grant that we've been given over the last year to facilitate mental health support in the community, using the church space to host things like tonight. We've had seminars in the past on anxiety, financial literacy, different topics around that to give the community support, especially kind of as we transition out of COVID. So tonight we want to give a welcome to our online viewers as well, and our in-person crowd. My name is Josh, and I'm the Community Hub Coordinator here at the church, and I've been the one that's been responsible for kind of coordinating this grant for the past year. So tonight we have a special guest, Dr. Magda. She's a former family physician who worked for AHS here in Alberta, and she's currently in Europe tonight. So when she comes on, we'll give her a warm welcome, because the time difference, obviously, being in Hungary, and she's joining us tonight live all the way from Europe. So we're thankful for that. Magda is a former family physician, as mentioned, who overcame severe depression and through lifestyle change and her faith. She currently works as a mental health wellness educator and peer support trainer, and teaching other people with these strategies that she has accumulated and learned over the years. And we are really, like I said, excited to hear her tonight and what she has to share. And so kind of the goal for tonight is, one is education. So you guys probably all know people in your own life, or maybe yourself, that went through mental health struggles in the last 2 years with COVID and even before that. And so she's going to share some practical strategies on how we can not just be educated, but help ourselves and our family and friends who are struggling with that and those kind of things. Just want to give you guys a few other updates. On May 12th, we have another seminar coming up here on eating disorders. So we'll have a PhD person coming from, counselor from BC. She'll be here that night. And on May 19th, we'll have a seminar on fitness and healthy eating and how that can contribute to mental health and help in that area as well. If you guys have any questions, so the live audience, if you guys have any questions at the end, we'll have a time around 8:15, 8:20 for you guys to ask live. If you're online, in the chat box, you guys can definitely type in your questions throughout the seminar, and we can ask Magda those at the end of the night as well. This is also being recorded, so if you're watching on Zoom, just click the little box that says you consent to being recorded, and the recording will be posted up next week if you want to share this with any of your friends or family, and it'll be posted online as well. If you guys have any suggestions or feedback afterwards, come talk to me, or you can send me an email for the online viewers, and even on future topics that you would like to hear about in the future. We'd love to hear from you. And with that, Doug, is it possible to get Magda on now? Why don't we give her a warm welcome? So if you're online, throw up those emoji clapping hands, and if you're live here, why don't we give a warm welcome to Magda, and she'll come up.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to share tonight. As Josh mentioned, this is something that is very personal to me, because it's not something I just studied in med school and, it's sort of theory, or I advise some patients on it, but I went through quite a serious depression. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in just a moment. But what I want to go through tonight is, I'll show you this overview. First, I want to address, can lifestyle change actually be therapeutic? Because we hear about it sometimes as, well, it can be preventative, and maybe, it can support mental health in general, but can it actually be considered an option, alongside with other therapies? So I'll talk a little bit about the evidence of that. We're going to go into then some specific areas of lifestyle. First of all, diet, looking at two areas, carbs and how they affect mental health, and healthy fats, what we need to know about those. I'm going to look at as well details about sleep, how that influences our mood, and exercise. So back to the question, can lifestyle change really be that powerful? And I'm going to say, uh, actually, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I'm going to show you what I looked like. This is my driver's license just when I stopped practicing, because I had developed depression for the first time in 1995. So this is a few years into practice. And then it recurred after I had my son. And I struggled along for a few years, and I was trying the usual medication treatments and stuff. And I just got worse and worse and worse. And so when I finally had to give up practice, I couldn't cope anymore. This is what I looked like. And I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. And I'm assuming you can share. Can you share my video? So people can see me? Or perhaps we'll do that at the end as I'm taking questions, because it says here the host has stopped my video. So we'll go back to screen sharing. And basically, even just looking at me, I did not look physically healthy. And of course, mentally, I was in a very, very severe depression, so severe that I couldn't work. I couldn't even manage things at home. Even though I wasn't working, I couldn't take care of my son. And once I stopped working, things even got worse, to the point where I spent about 3 years in and out of hospital getting shock treatments. And my prognosis that was given to me at the end of those 3 years, it was, well, you have about a 10 to 15% risk of suicide. You're going to be on long-term disability. We don't think you're ever going to work again. And you'll need to be on medications for the rest of your life. And quite likely you're going to need to be in hospital again, on and off. That's where I was when I, in desperation, because I discovered my memory was being affected by the treatments. So at that point, I became willing to get engaged. Up to that point, I was a good patient. I took the medication as prescribed, and I saw my doctors, and I did, all my appointments and everything. But I was waiting really for someone to fix me. And at that point, it became, well, what is it I can do? I want to do anything and everything possible to avoid having more of these treatments. And so at that point, I was actually, from my church, my pastor referred me to a Christian psychologist. And then that psychologist was actually very, very well read on all the research coming out in medical journals about the power of various aspects of lifestyle. And so she got me to start looking at healthy fats, and I started taking some supplements. And then she got me to buy a bright light therapy unit. And she even managed to get me to start exercising. And that was quite an accomplishment. Okay, I was your nerdy bookworm. I like to curl up on the sofa with a book. I did not like to move. But I started doing all those things, and lo and behold, I never went back to hospital again. And gradually, I got better. And that's when I started doing my own research. And this is what I found out. So what the medical textbooks will say is that um, there are lots of different contributing factors to mental health. And what this is called, because doctors need to talk in big fancy doctor jargon, and they call this the biopsychosocial model. And you can see it's just the first part of the 3 words in the 3 circles. So the green circle is biological. Pink circle is psychological. It's your thought patterns, how you look at problems, how you analyze things, what your beliefs are. Then there's the social. And again, during the last couple of years in COVID, I think everyone's realized, how critical that social connectedness is. Well, tonight I'm going to focus mainly on that green circle, the biological. And I want you to think of it this way. So rather than these sort of interconnected circles, I want to give you an analogy. And I want you to consider uh, living life as sitting on a stool. And I'm going to show you a nice three-legged stool. And you can see here, I mean, the three legs of the stool correspond to those three circles. And so it's just intuitive to have a stable perch on that stool, to live life well. All the legs of the stool, they individually, they need to be strong. They also need to be balanced, right? I mean, you can't just say focus on the social aspect of your life and totally ignore your sleep and your diet and those biological things. Or let's say you're taking care of your diet and your sleep and all of that, but you have really, really harmful patterns of thinking. Well, then that can make you wobbly, as it were. That can kind of take you down into depression, into anxiety. And the reason that this biological leg is so important and the way it influences us is really all through hormones. Hormones are chemical messengers in the body, and they basically send messages from one part of your body to another. And if the certain parts of your lifestyle are not very healthy, well, guess what? The hormones, the messengers that your body sends out, signal inflammation. And I'm going to show you this statement, and it's really, really critical. And that is, an inflamed brain is a depressed and often anxious brain. Okay, it makes sense. If you think of inflamed tissue, if you think arthritis, muscle inflammation, it hurts. Okay, an inflamed brain is not going to function very well. So as I started looking into this more, and again, I was just sort of becoming stable. I really didn't want to relapse. And so I was reading everything I could. I wanted to make sure I was uh, maintaining things to the best of my ability. And I found this book called The Depression Cure. And what it talks about is something called a therapeutic lifestyle change. And the author of this book is a clinical psychologist, and he ran trials at the University of Kansas, basically dividing people who had clinical depression into two groups. And one group got sort of conventional treatment, which meant medications, and the other group were supported by this team of exercise physiologists and nutritionists and psychologists. And they did this therapeutic lifestyle change. And you can see the response rate was much, much better, actually, with the therapeutic lifestyle change than with the medication group. Now, I want to stop here for just a moment, and I don't want anyone to interpret this as saying, I don't think medications are necessary, or if you're on medication or a loved one is on medication, I'm not saying at all that you should just go and chuck it. Okay, never, ever, ever change medication that you're taking without talking to the doctor who prescribed it. But what research does show is that as a first line, as a first intervention, we're a lot better addressing those contributing factors, as it were, to get to the root of the issue than to go straight to medication. Medication is proven to work the best when depression is very, very severe. So again, it's all about figuring out, what works best at what stage. And even if you are on medication, addressing the lifestyle issues, stabilizing those hormones, getting rid of the inflammation, that helps everybody. So we'll go on to nutrition. And I want to start off, I mentioned I'll be talking about carbs and healthy fats, but I wanted to mention really quickly, it is so important to adequately hydrate because our bodies and our brains are made up of water primarily. Our body is 70% water. And actually, the first symptom of dehydration is usually a headache. So it's important to drink at least 6 to 8 glasses of water a day. And I tell people, if you're a tiny petite woman, those can be small glasses, like 8-ounce glasses. If you're a big, athletic guy, you're talking 8, probably 16-ounce glasses, okay? But you want to keep all your tissues and your brain tissue hydrated. So something very, very simple to do is just a habit to develop. Now, before we get into the details of the nutrition, I just want to review really quickly um, the important stuff to know about food composition. So everything we put in our mouth is either water, as I just talked about, or proteins, fats, or carbs. And our digestive tract, its main job is to break those foods down into their smallest components, individual molecules. I mean, that in proteins will be amino acids. For fats, that's fatty acids. And in carbohydrates that are made up of sugar, starches, and fiber, that's individual sugar molecules. And it's those individual molecules that your intestines can actually absorb. And that's how they get in the bloodstream. Now, the food that we eat serves different purposes. And the thing that, I mean, this is the only thing I used to think about was the aspect of food as a fuel because I was just interested in calories. I had been overweight my whole life, and I was always interested in cutting calories and watching calories and not having too many calories and all this kind of stuff because I wanted to lose weight. But really, and this is a car analogy, you see the gas can here. If we think of uh, of a vehicle, we intuitively know, I mean, our vehicles aren't going to run if we don't top up the gas tank. We need fuel, and we need that in all of our cells and in our brain cells. And particularly important to know is our brain cells can't store any fuel. Your muscle tissue, for example, can store glycogen, it can store sugar, but brain tissue, all it has is what's in the blood supply. And so our fuel is primarily carbohydrates. What happens is that the little furnaces in our cells, the mitochondria, burn glucose. This is the basic sugar molecule. So we talk about blood glucose levels. So you need oxygen to burn that glucose, and it gives out energy to do all the different cellular functions and the byproducts, carbon dioxide that you breathe out in water. All right. So the key point here is steady blood glucose means optimal brain function. It means you have a steady fuel supply to your brain cells to do whatever it is they need to do. Now, if we understand that, okay, well, we want steady blood glucose. It's also important to understand, well, where does that blood glucose come from? And, of course, I mean, it comes from what we eat, but there's different components, different types of carbs. And I'll show you a little diagram here. So in foods, you can have naturally occurring sugars. Think of fruit, that's a little bit sweet. Uh, there's natural sugars in there. Then, in any kind of food practically that is prepared, packaged, you have added sugars. And those added sugars can be very, very, very significant. And this is why, part of the reason that processed foods and packaged foods are unhealthy because they can have lots of added sugar. Then you have sugar that comes from the breakdown of other more complex carbohydrates, starches, which are long molecules, like long chains of molecules. So all of those put together will give all the glucose that is in your bloodstream. You have a fourth component because your body can actually produce glucose from the digestion of protein, and that's quite a long process. That's why we say, to get sustained energy, we want to be having protein with every meal. Okay, I see my video there. Awesome. So again, for practical purposes, what we want to pay attention to mostly is the added sugar in the food that we're eating, and the types of carbohydrates that we're having. And this is why. This graph shows you this vertical is showing, and on the horizontal here, this is the time that has passed by after you've eaten. So the 0 point here, this is say when you've had a meal. And there are 4 different lines here. And you'll see the great big peak here, this gray dotted line. That is a really high spike. That is your blood sugar when you have something that's called high glycemic, something that turns into sugar very, very quickly. Think starchy foods, think white bread, pasta, white rice, okay, these types of things. You have a different kind of carbohydrate line, this kind of green line over here, where you can see there is a spike, but it's a lot more moderate. And those are called low glycemic carbs. These would be another term for them are complex carbohydrates, whole grains. You're thinking things like steel cut oats or brown rice or vegetables, beans, things like that, right? Okay, so they will elevate your blood sugar, but a lot more modestly. And then you have 2 other lines. This pink line, you can see that spikes. The spike again is nowhere near as high as for carbs. So the blood sugar raises and it peaks maybe 2 to 3 hours after you eat. Okay, quite a bit of time goes on before that protein affects your blood sugar. And this lowest line here that hardly affects it at all, this kind of bluish green line, that's fat. All right, so fat really doesn't affect your blood sugar level. Now, why this is important to know is how your body, again, it reacts to these fluctuations in your blood sugar. I'll show you this. Again, we're looking at blood glucose levels and the time after eating. And we see this sort of curve here. So let's say we went to McDonald's and had a Big Mac meal with, fries and a Coke. Well, look at this. Woof, your blood sugar is just shooting right up there. This is an artificially high blood sugar or blood glucose. Um, in nature, we don't see Coca-Cola out in nature. We don't have white flour, all right? That's made by processing. Processing means the outer layer of the wheat kernel is taken off, the wheat germ inside is taken off. You're left with the starchy part of the wheat. And that basically turns into glucose very, very, very quickly. When that happens, your body, it wants to maintain a very, very narrow range. You see this green area, all right? Very narrow. That's what's considered normal glucose. That's what gives optimal brain function, right? A steady, even supply of glucose. When you get a spike like this, your body goes kind of into panic mode. And it sort of says, "Oh my gosh, this isn't good. Uh, start getting rid of this glucose. We need insulin." Right? Insulin is a hormone. It's like a key that opens the lock in the door of the cells. So it helps glucose go from the bloodstream into the cell. And so, okay, so your body reacts to this really big spike in blood glucose, pushes out a whole bunch of insulin. But again, the insulin in nature is designed to handle natural carbs, not these artificial big spikes, sugary drinks, and lots of French fries. And so it overreacts. Then you crash. And many people, are told, well, you have hypoglycemic attacks. Hypo, think low. um, you know, all of a sudden you can feel shaky, you can feel irritable. Some people get outright hangry. Your brain can feel fuzzy, and you crave something sweet, like you need to eat something so that you can function properly again. Um, Unfortunately, when you're in this glucose crash, again, this is an emergency. Your brain cells aren't getting fuel. And so they're putting out signals, eat something sweet. I need sugar right away. And that sets up the whole thing to happen again, because then you're going to spike again, more insulin is going to be produced, then you're going to crash again, and you have this roller coaster. What is proven uh, in lots and lots and lots of studies is that a high refined carbohydrate, so think your white flour, your starches, pasta, simple sugars, these things trigger insulin spikes. Then the insulin, it's designed, if you have lots of glucose in the cell and the cell doesn't need it, it's going to store it as fat. So it turns on fat storage. Then it also, because the body is in panic mode, right? It's trying to, instead of your sugar going like this, it wants it stable. Um, it's producing stress hormones to deal with the stress of the low blood sugar. And then that stress, again, because you're wanting to get a supply of glucose, it stimulates your appetite. And as I mentioned before, then typically you eat sugar, you eat something that makes your blood sugar go up again, you start the whole thing over. Now, very, very key things to know is insulin and stress hormones, and actually glucose itself, they're all inflammatory in the body. They cause inflammation. Um, they also, you end up having cravings for more sugar in this cycle. And remember what I said. Uh, the insulin, the stress hormones, the glucose itself is inflammatory. An inflamed brain is a depressed and anxious brain. All right, this is just very basic body biochemistry. Now, consider this, the average Canadian eats the equivalent of 26 teaspoons of sugar every day. Now, you might go like, I don't use that much sugar in my coffee. Like, you've got to be kidding. Well, I mean, consider that one can of soda can be up to 10 teaspoons of sugar. A yogurt, this is one of my pet peeves because, many people, we hear the advertisements for the different kinds of yogurt and how it's so healthy and it's good for your gut and everything. Well, I mean, yes, the fermentation process that can give you healthy bacteria, but check out the little yogurt containers. Tiny little container can have up to 3-4 teaspoons of sugar. And what's recommended is that women have at most 6 teaspoons a day and men have 9. So 26 is way, way, way more than what is considered healthy. Just a little bit more about starch, because I mentioned carbohydrates are made up of individual sugar molecules and also starch. And starch, as you see here, it's basically just a chain of glucose molecules and they're linked together. But these links are pretty flimsy. And all it takes is a little enzyme called amylase, that's called a starch clipper. You have amylase already in your saliva, and you have lots of it in your stomach acid. Uh, that will start clipping these links and free up, simple glucose. So really, if you have a starchy meal, and again, potatoes are starchy, anything made with white flour or processed grains is starchy, then that's going to turn into glucose within 30 to 60 minutes, and it'll shoot your blood sugar up. Starch in our diet, if you think in general of white foods, white flour, white pasta, white potatoes, white rice, okay, all of those have been processed, and those starch chains that are left very, very quickly are broken down into sugar. Now, one caution, the food industry knows now that people are being advised, we're starting to look for whole grains or multigrain things. And a lot of things, breads, think crackers, think cereals, they will have on the label, oh, it's whole grain or oh, it's multigrain. I don't want to burst your bubble, but most of the time, it's still very, very processed, and it's not really truly multigrain. Quick little formula I'll give you. And this is, again, if you're checking out the bread that you usually buy or breakfast cereals or something like that, very simple thing to test. You look at the nutrition label and you look for the total number of carbs per serving. And maybe it's, in a slice of bread, maybe it says it's 18 grams of carbs. Then you look for the grams of fiber per serving. Maybe it says, oh, there's 2 grams of fiber because it's, whole grain bread. Well, if you do the math, okay, the total carbs, if that's 18, fiber is 2, that gives you a ratio of 9. And what the magic number is 5 or less. So really you want the ratio, you want lots of fiber in whatever carbs you're having. Again, so that the ratio, the lower the number is, and 5 is kind of that magic point, which means your blood sugar is not going to start, shooting up. That's what you want it to be. In general, you can find some breads. Lots of sprouted grain breads are like that. A little warning, cereal aisle, pretty much except All Bran and your some bran flakes, and maybe there's some Kashi cereal. A lot of the others, even again, the ones that say multigrain, check the numbers. Total carbs over fiber, you're going to see a lot of them are 7, 8, 9, even higher. All right. So you want to be sure that what you're looking for as multigrain really is. Now we're going to go to the other part of nutrition. And we were talking about fuel up till now. We're going to go back to the car analogy and think about it. Besides fuel, if you want your car to keep running well, you need to look at maintenance, right? You need to take it in for an oil change. You need to periodically change the transmission fluid, change the brake pads, all kinds of things that you need to tune up, change parts, really keep in good shape. Well, the amazing thing is that our bodies do a lot of their own maintenance. That's how they're designed to function. The only thing that is really important for that is that they need the right components. And we're talking about this now because we get those components through the food that we eat. So that's why we talk about nutritious foods, things that give us nutrients, the vitamins, the minerals, the proper fats, the proper amino acids, all that kind of, the building blocks. Now, as far as our brain function goes, healthy fats are really, really important. And we talk of essential fatty acids. In scientific terms, that's what they're called. And these are fat molecules that our body cannot manufacture. Now, I don't know about your body. My body, it's really good at making fat. I take in extra calories. Oh, it'll make fat, but it isn't the right kind of fat. All right. Our brain cells in the brain cell walls, it needs particular kinds of fats. And they call them essential because they can only be found in diet. All right. Your body can't make them. And there's two main types. You may have heard of them already. There's omega-3s. These are the ones that are really important in the cell membranes and in the cell walls. And then there are omega-6s, which again, in the body, they have a very important function. They mediate inflammation. And I don't want to give the impression that inflammation is all bad. I mean, if you injure your finger, you get a splinter, and then you basically have your barrier compromised. You could have bacteria, germs getting in there, cause an infection. So your body reacts to that. And what happens? Well, you'll see the area around it swells up a little bit. You'll have some oozing that has white blood cells in it, right? Your immune system is sending cells there to close it off the area and protect itself. So in an appropriate amount, inflammation is a good thing. It's when it's out of control that it's a bad thing. Now, a little bit more about omega-3s. They're building blocks, all right? Very, very critical for your brain cells to function properly. They help neurotransmitters to function properly. Because again, neurotransmitters, chemical messengers that are going between the brain cells. One releases them, they float across a tiny little space attached to a receptor. That's how they give their message. But that attaching to the receptor and the transmission of the message, that happens optimally if there are enough healthy fats around. And lo and behold, omega-3s help in the production of anti-inflammatory hormones. And remember, an inflamed brain is a depressed and anxious brain. So let's just look at fats, right? Think of a cell wall in a nerve cell in your brain. And you don't need to know all the different components, but what you see here, look at all the orange there. All of that is fat or lipids, all right? And you can start seeing here then, I mean, if the majority of the cell wall is lipid, is fat, if you don't have the right type of fat that's going to give you the proper flexibility in the cell wall, your receptors, that your neurotransmitters attached to, they're built into the cell wall. All right. They're not going to transmit their message properly if your cell wall is rigid. I mean, just imagine a receptor as being a baseball glove, all right? And this baseball is the serotonin or the norepinephrine, whatever kind of messenger hormone. And you're trying to grab it, but you have a really old, dry, beaten up baseball glove, all right? It hasn't been oiled. You don't have the proper fat in your cell wall. Well, you're not going to be able to grab onto that neurotransmitter. You might have enough of it, but it won't attach. Now, let's start to look at, okay, so where do we find these essential fatty acids in nature? Well, the omega-3s, again, that help in the building up of the cell walls and stuff, those in nature are found in leaves, grasses, and algae. And here we can start to think then, oh, okay, so this is why grass-fed beef is good for us, right? Because grasses, I mean, cows that are grass-fed, lots and lots and lots of grass. Well, hey, all of a sudden that meat is high in omega-3s. Or your cold water fish that eat algae. Oh, they're high in omega-3s. Okay, these are where we nutritionally get our healthy fats. Then let's look at omega-6s. Now in nature, you'll find them in seeds, nuts, and grains. And again, it's important to consider their natural form. So if you have grains in their natural form or nuts or seeds, they're good. The problem with modern day industrialized agriculture is that we're using a lot of processed seed oils. We're having a lot of livestock is grain fed. Again, grain is very high in omega 6s. Omega 6s, when you get out of balance, they promote inflammation. And what we see is there's actually a known ratio of these two essential fatty acids, omega 6s to omega 3s. A healthy ratio, scientists know, is like 1 to 1, maybe 2 to 1, you know. So, I mean, they have to be pretty much even. But the average North American is around 16 to 1. All right, now we can see, oh, how is it that that inflammation is running rampant? And it's thought inflammation is actually the underlying cause of lots of physical health issues, cardiovascular disease, joint inflammation, gut inflammation, dementia, okay? So lots and lots of evidence of how that is damaging. So what we want to do to restore balance, again, not super complicated. We want to increase the omega 3s. So really important to look at your dietary intake. For many, many years, I was so focused on avoiding calories. And of course, fat is the most calorie dense food. So I was avoiding nuts, I was avoiding seeds, I was avoiding oils. Okay. You can find the sources of healthy fats, and you do want to have those. All right. You want to be sure you're getting enough of those. And on the other hand, you want to decrease the unhealthy type of oils. And those types of seed-based oils are going to be found in fast foods, in processed foods, things in the grocery store. Again, your dressings, your sauces, your spreads, either added to bagels. It becomes important to look at ingredient lists, and you want to avoid the seed-based oils. You want to avoid corn oil, palm kernel oil, safflower, sunflower, and look at what are healthier oils, right? If you can avoid grain-fed meat and get grass-fed meat, it's certainly a lot healthier. And healthy fats, I mean, this just gives you a visual, all right? From the plant world, avocados have lots of omega 3s, olive oil, flaxseed oil, all right? Those have healthy fats in them. Walnuts, almonds, all right? They have a high ratio of omega 3 to omega 6s. Different fish like salmon, sardines, trout, mackerel, okay? Getting a few servings of those a week. That is a very good way to support healthy brain function. Now, we're going to go on from nutrition to the next big thing, which is exercise. And I'm going to give you a quote, and that's something from this book, all right? And this book is called Spark, The Revolutionary New Science of Exercise and the Brain. And it was written by a psychiatrist who is an associate professor at Harvard. And what Dr. Ratey says is it is simply one of the best treatments we have for most psychiatric problems. Now, I want to point out 3 things here, okay? First thing is he's calling it a treatment. And again, lots of scientific evidence shows that good aerobic exercise is as good as or better than medication for depression. Lots and lots of studies show that. Now, not only is it a treatment, it's one of the best treatments. That's the second thing, okay? One of the best treatments. Third thing that he says, most psychiatric problems. So that includes depression, it includes anxiety, includes ADHD, okay? So the really big common issues, exercise is absolutely fantastic for, all right? Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, does that mean I have to like go to the gym for like 3 hours and sweat and like sweat pouring off of me and do weight training and neck veins bulging, ooh, or run marathons or something? I can't do that. I'm going like, well, I couldn't do that either. All right. Good news. All you need is 30 minutes brisk walking 3 times a week. 90 minutes a week. And that makes it an effective treatment for depression. Okay. The only thing you need to remember is it needs to be continuous. So not stop and start. It needs to be steady and intense enough. It's kind of like brisk walking as if you were going to catch the bus. Okay. Not you're walking your dog and you're stopping for the sniff and sprinkle and you're looking at your phone. No. You need to be moving. Okay. But what does exercise do to your hormones? Well, let's look at certain things that it decreases. It decreases adrenaline and cortisol. Those are stress hormones. And lo and behold, it decreases insulin. Let's look at the opposite side. What does it increase? Well, it increases a whole bunch of neurotransmitters. Dopamine has to do with motivation, pleasure. Serotonin, of course, I'm sure people have heard of that before. A lot of the antidepressants work on serotonin levels. GABA is a calming neurotransmitter. All right, so you have more of this calming neurotransmitter. Endorphins are the body's natural painkillers. And then on top of all that, you have growth factors. But just again, let me just review. It decreases the stress hormones and it decreases insulin. It also helps regulate your blood sugar levels. And what did I say before? All of those increase inflammation. And you've hopefully are getting the swing of things. An inflamed brain is not a happy brain. Okay, we want to decrease inflammation. I'm going to mention just a little bit about these growth factors. There's a very special growth factor in the brain, only produced in the brain. And what it does is it helps with neuroplasticity, big fancy term, but that just means that the connectivity of neurons. You see nerve cells here, you see all the little dendrites reaching out. They're all interconnected together, okay? Very well connected, interconnected neurons communicate well. So you want the connections to be vigorous, you want them to be strong. It also helps, another big fancy term, neurogenesis, in the generation of new nerve cells. All right. I mean, I'm thinking I'd like having new brain cells. All right. This is really good. Well, of half an hour of aerobic activity, you're going to be producing some of this BDNF, all right? And Dr. Rady, in his book, he actually calls exercise miracle grow for your brain. It literally fertilizes your brain cells. Now, quick screening test for you, do you get enough exercise? And one caveat, this is for dog owners, okay? But screening test. If your dog looks like this, you aren't getting enough exercise, all right? Of course, neither is your little Poochie. And I'll just show you my dog, Coco. This is when he was about 7 years old. So he's kind of a middle-aged dog. Looking in pretty good shape, I'm happy to say. And it really comes down to the old Nike tagline, which is just do it. And again, I mean, there's lots of resources that you can look up. Um, Really very basic thing to think about is give it a place in your life. Don't make it really super complicated and difficult to do, and don't set super high goals. If you're not doing anything, start off small. Start off with like a 10-minute walk, all right, and build it up from there. Give yourself some wins. So set a small goal, and helps if you create accountability. Maybe you want to walk with someone. Maybe you want to talk with someone on the phone while you're doing it. Whatever works for you. And make a time for it in your schedule. People who really think out and put on paper what and when they're going to do it are 3 times more likely to follow through. All right. So again, exercise, one of the best treatments for depression. And last but not least, we're going to look at sleep. And for me, I mean, when I was an intern, and I mean, you hear these tales, and they're true. When you're a med student and later an intern, you work some grueling hours. Like I had 36-hour days. So once I was finished that, I kind of thought, well, hey, if I could do that, sleeping 6 hours a night, I mean, gee, that's like luxury. I don't need 8 hours a night. And so I continued that unhealthy habit. How common is sleep deprivation? It's pretty staggering. I mean, at least 80% of adults, 85% of teenagers, and even half of children. So it's very common. And probably that's why over 90% of us ingest stimulants on a daily basis. I mean, huge. The caffeine consumption has just skyrocketed in the last couple of decades. Now, again, you might sort of think, well, geez, really? I mean, sleep, getting an extra hour or two of sleep, is that going to make that much difference? Well, I want to share with you um, a lady who told her story to me. I was presenting at the Calgary Board of Education conference one year, and we were talking about depression and these lifestyle factors. And she asked if she could share something about sleep. And this lady, we'll call her Karen, she had noticed, for a year or two, she was just getting more and more tired, and just very little energy. She had lots of trouble focusing. She'd forget things. Just sort of felt like her brain was in a fog, and her mood was pretty low. Like she just didn't feel like doing anything. And she went to her doctor for a checkup. And her doctor, went through her whole history and checked her over and said, physically you're fine. I do think you have moderate clinical depression. And her doctor then said, I think you should go on medication. And Karen's like, oh, whoa, okay. I mean, I don't know that I want to uh, start a prescription medication. Is there anything else I can do? And her doctor, again, she'd gone over the details of Karen's life, pretty carefully. And she started saying, well, Karen, is it true you said you only sleep like maybe 6 hours a night? And Karen said, well, yeah, I mean, my started when my kids were small, I mean, I slept less then, and I get by with 6, I'm fine. And her doctor said, well, no, most adults, they need 8 hours, so if you can promise you'll get 8 hours sleep a night, we can try that for a month. But if you're not better, we're going to need to start medication. So Karen, she sort of thought, well, if I'm sleep deprived, maybe I should catch up on my sleep. She allotted herself 9 hours, and she did that faithfully for a month. And she went back to her doctor, and they went over the symptoms. She was like, well, yeah, my energy's better, and my brain's clearer, and I'm starting to be interested in hobbies, and I like going out again. And she felt completely better with sleeping. So very important. Now, what happens during sleep? Well, I'm going to mention three really important things. There are other things, but the most important. There's physical repair of cells happening. And again, that can be in your brain, in your nervous system, but all the tissues of the body. Um, think your immune system, for example. And when we don't get enough sleep, typically your immune system isn't functioning as well. That's when you tend to catch more colds and flus. Your immune system is is typically on guard for renegade cells, that might be turning cancerous, to catch those quickly. Well, guess what? If you're chronically sleep deprived, a lot of different cancers, their rates increase. Higher rates of obesity, higher rates of blood sugar. Okay, not good things. So it's important for your body to have that rest time for your cells to repair. Second thing is, again, here are our lovely neurons in the brain. Toxins. If you think waste products, I mentioned about glucose being burned for fuel, right? I mean, you get byproducts from that. You have other toxins, that all the different reactions, chemical reactions that happen in the cells, there are byproducts that build up. And nighttime is the time when the lymphatic fluid, it flushes out your brain, the lymphatic flow increases. So you get rid of toxins. And then third, that's the time when your memories are actually processed, and they go from like short-term storage to long-term storage if they're deemed to be important. So if you're not getting enough sleep, as far as your mental and emotional state goes, you're letting yourself in for poor judgment, for poor concentration, reduced memory, lower mood, increased anxiety and irritability. I mean, I know when I was doing call and I didn't have a proper night's sleep, I mean, I was a real grouch the next day. And back to our hormones, these chemical messengers. What happens to those when we're sleep deprived? Guess what? Higher levels of stress hormones, higher glucose levels, higher insulin levels. All of these are what? Inflammatory. And an inflamed brain is a depressed and anxious brain. So getting really, really good sleep, refreshing, restorative sleep, is vital. All right. Very, very, very critical. The Centers for Disease Control in the States, I mean, they're saying that sleep deficit is an epidemic. I mean, they're warning people that this is really, really critical. Now, the keys to good sleep are really two main things. You want to make sure you get enough quantity, right? Think of Karen's story. She got that extra couple hours of sleep, her brain reset, she was good. The other thing you want to look at, because maybe you are in bed 8 hours, even 9 hours, but the quality of your sleep isn't good. You wake up and you're not refreshed. So what can you do to get better quality sleep? And we're going to go through some points of good sleep hygiene, is what they call it. All right. And one point is, use the bed only for sleep. You want to associate the bed with relaxation, not, getting your laptop in there or being on your smartphone and checking emails and whatever else. No, the bed is for sleep. I mean, if you have a partner, you know what else beds are for, but relaxation. Second thing is, you always want to get up and go to bed roughly the same time. Our bodies are on what's called a circadian rhythm, this 24-hour cycle. And if we look at different hormone levels in the body, they're not always uniform, but they have different patterns over those 24 hours. And there's certain hormones like melatonin that help induce sleep. Well, they're supposed to go up at night to make you sleepy and sustain sleep. So as much as we can help make that circadian rhythm solid, so it's not getting up at 6 a.m. weekdays and then at the crack of noon on weekends. You want to make it uniform. Um, you want to avoid naps. And typically, if I'm teaching groups and things like that, I get a little bit of pushback on this. But again, if your sleep isn't refreshing, especially if you have trouble falling asleep or you're waking up early, you're tossing and turning, having a nap during the day, it's going to mess up your cycle. So sleep specialists, are adamant you don't want to take naps in the day. You want to avoid bright lights in the evening. And again, I mean, the biggest thing are, these things, your devices, your iPads or your smartphones, laptops too. I'm going to talk more about smartphones in just a couple of minutes. Fifth thing, you want to avoid stimulants. Now, caffeine, we pretty much all know that caffeine is stimulant. Nicotine is also a stimulant. I mean, I'd encourage people who smoke to try and cut back. This is just one more reason, all right, health-wise. And sugar. All right. I mean, I noticed it with my son when he was a teenager and he'd go to youth group Friday nights, and of course they always had the candy and the pop and he came home one night and he's just pacing and he's like, "Mom, I'm wired," right? Because I didn't keep any of that stuff at home, and he noticed how much of an effect that had. All right. So cutting back the sugar can actually help give you a calmer sleep. Now, a little bit more about caffeine, all right? Because some people will say, well, I only have a few cups and things like that. Well, first of all, there's a little bit of individual variation, but it's also important to consider when you're having the caffeine and how long it takes for caffeine to clear out from your body. And there's something in medical terms they call a half-life. And for caffeine, that's the amount of time it takes for half of the caffeine to clear out of your system. So for caffeine, that's 4 hours. The other thing we have to have some idea of is like, okay, so what dose of caffeine is it that I'm ingesting? And a few examples. And as far as the milligram amount that can start to affect sleep, 25 milligrams in your system when you go to bed is enough to disturb your sleep. Now, just to give you a comparison, a can of cola can be almost 50 milligrams. So if you have a can of Coke, after supper, say, 6, 7 o'clock at night, well, 10, 11 p.m., you're still going to have 25 milligrams of caffeine in your system. A shot of espresso, it can be up to 100 milligrams. And say a coffee, and I'm not talking one of the extra large ones, but probably just a medium one, about 350 mils. I mean, there's a range, but on average, that's going to be usually about 200 milligrams of caffeine. And so a general way to think about it is, let's say you had a coffee at noon. Well, it was 200. By 4 o'clock in the afternoon, then you're going to be down to 100, right? Because half of it's gone. Okay, then by 8 p.m., you're down to 50. Oh, so then at midnight, you're still at 25. So, just as an average rule, I'd say, having 1 or 2 coffees in the morning for most people is probably a good limit to shoot for. Again, later on in the day doesn't give you enough time to get rid of it. Now, the sixth thing is you want to avoid alcohol. And some people say, and alcohol does seem to have the effect of making you a little bit drowsy. So it's sort of like, well, yeah, have a nightcap and get to sleep. Well, you end up shooting yourself in the foot because what that alcohol does, yes, initially it makes you drowsy, but it also affects your sleep cycle. So it'll reduce the amount of deep sleep that you have, and it'll make your sleep more restless. So not a good way to treat insomnia. Very simple thing is for quality of sleep is setting the room temperature lower. Um, and experts will say, I mean, probably about at least 4 degrees lower. So if your house is usually around 22 degrees Celsius, try going down to 18. 4 or 5 degrees lower um, tends to give you a deeper sleep. A couple of more things. You want to avoid bringing problems to bed. Again, you want to associate your bed and your bedroom with relaxation. A really good way to not have negative thoughts and things is I advise people to try gratitude journaling. So, just before bed, maybe in bed, have a little notepad. Think of a couple of things that you're grateful for that day. Doesn't have to be like, woo, big things. Could be, oh, I just got an electric blanket and it's nice and warm and cozy. Or, so the little things. Um, point number 9 says, don't stay in bed if you can't sleep. Because again, the more you're in bed tossing and turning, and then you're looking at the clock, going like, oh no, now I only have 5 hours left. Now I only have 4 hours left. Oh, I mean, it gets you more tense, all right, and it's counterproductive. It's a better idea is roughly give yourself 10-15 minutes. And again, you don't want to be watching the clock all the time. It's best not to be looking at the clock. But if you judge you've been in bed 15 minutes and you're really not drowsy, get yourself out of bed and find a comfortable spot, a recliner or something like that, not in kind of a dimly lit area, and do something relaxing. Maybe you want to listen to music, maybe you want to read a book, something like that, just to kind of tone you down and get you drowsy. Last point here is about eating. And again, very common habit these days is we rush during the day, then we have a big supper, and then a lot of times we snack throughout the evening, right? Not a good idea, because your body, if you're working on digesting a big meal, you're not able to rest. Your body isn't able to go into rest mode. So, try and have a modest supper, a moderate supper, and not eat anything afterwards. It's very, very healthy to have like a 12-hour fasting period. It's good for your hormones. Remember all the hormones and the effect on inflammation? Now, one thing I'll go back, I said we'll go back to the smartphone. And this is the single biggest influence on sleep these days. This guy right here, okay? Um, different, surveys done by different organizations give different numbers, but anywhere from 2/3 to up to 80% of adults sleep with their phone on. And that is very, very detrimental. Now, the first thing, I mean, I mentioned the bright light in the evening, and I meet lots of people, and they say, "Oh, well, I turn on the blue light function on my phone or my computer, so it's all good. I'm not getting that blue light that'll affect the melatonin." Well, okay, that's one part of it, but there are other things, because when you're on a device, it's stimulating. We want to be in a routine and winding down and calming down, kind of getting ready for sleep. We don't want to be checking the news or posting things on social media or going over the last email from my boss or whatever, right? No, we want to be calming down. So that's another reason that not being on your device for at least an hour before bed is a good idea. The other thing is sleep cycle interruption. So again, this is when your phone, some people, and I do this, I put my phone on flight mode, turn off the Wi-Fi, and I use it as an alarm clock. Now, if I wake up during the night, I'm not tempted to turn it on. A lot of people are, though. And even if it's only a minute or two, that still creates a big problem. And this is why. All right, I want to talk a little bit about sleep cycles, and then I'm going to wrap it up. So our sleep cycle, sleep isn't one big, long, uniform, unconscious time. Things are going on during sleep. And there's actually different parts of sleep. And we go through what are called cycles. So you'll see here in a typical, 8-hour sleep, you probably have about 5 cycles of sleep. They're, average person, it's about 90 minutes per cycle. And what you see happens is you go from being awake to non-REM sleep. Our REM stands for rapid eye movement. So you go through stage 1, which is very light sleep. You go deeper to stage 2, then you go to the deepest sleep, which is stage 3. So this is probably about, 15, 20 minutes after you fall asleep. Then you have that period of deep sleep. Oh, and then you go up to stage 2 and you go into REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. This is when if you watch somebody and you can see their eyeballs moving under their eyelids, that's rapid eye movement sleep. Different things happen during the different parts of the sleep cycle. 2 really key things is this really deep sleep, this is when your tissue repair happens, okay? So that's important to know. The REM sleep, the rapid eye movement sleep, is when you have the really vivid dreaming. That's when a lot of your processing happens. That's when your files are being sorted, your memories are being consolidated. Now, the key thing to understand is that if you interrupt a sleep cycle, so let's say you get woken up at 11:30 right here, okay? Your phone dinged because you got a message. Well, you might think that, well, it's only a minute, I read it, I'll go back to sleep. Well, the problem is, though, that when you go back to sleep, you don't just continue on, you go back to the beginning of the cycle. And so, then you're going to have to go through stage 1, then stage 2, then finally you're going to get into stage 3 again. Well, what happens if you start stage 3? Oh, boom, it bings again. Oh, okay. Well, only a minute, but hey, I go back to the beginning again. I realized this when I was an intern. And again, way back then, there weren't smartphones yet. I feel like a dinosaur. But I had a pager. And even if I didn't have to get up out of the bed in the call room and go to the ward, if I got 3, 4, 5 calls during the night and my sleep was interrupted, I felt miserable the next day. And we have a whole generation of young people who are growing up with these phones, and that's all they know is interrupted sleep. All right. So please, 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 please do yourself a favor, do your kids a favor. Okay. Banish the phone from your bedroom. If you're tempted to leave it on, if you're tempted to turn it on during the night, get an old-fashioned alarm clock and don't have your phone in your bedroom because it can really destroy the quality of your sleep. A couple of life hacks, and that is number 1 is make it a priority. All right. Do like Karen and go like, I'm going to make sure my body, my brain gets the 8 hours, that it needs, because that can go a long way to reversing a bunch of symptoms. And look at sleep hygiene. Is there something on that list that resonated with you? Maybe you're realizing like, oh gosh, yeah, that snacking at night, I do it all the time. Give it a try, for a week, and don't have anything after supper. See what you feel like. You can experiment with yourself. One really good piece of advice is bookend your day. So when you go to bed at night and when you get up in the morning, have at least half an hour, preferably an hour, where you're not on your device. Okay, you're not getting that constant input. All right, you can just let your brain be settled. And then the piece of advice of banning electronics and smartphones from the bedroom. Again, you're making into this little haven, this quiet haven, a peaceful, restful place. You know, there's no dinging, there's no multitasking on your phone. It's a quiet place. And that can, again, make such a big difference. So to wrap up, I'm going to give you a summary here. What I want you to think of is after this session, I mean, there's a lot of information. Again, we talked about 3 different parts of lifestyle, numerous points in each. You know, if you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed, you know, let's pare it back. And what I want you to think of is just choose one thing, okay? Just one thing that you're going to take action on. Because it's a lot better to act on one thing than have 3 dozen things in your mind that are just sort of floating around in there, but you're not changing anything, okay? So for example, you know, we talked about sleep last here. Think of what's one thing I can improve. One thing, okay? Maybe it is banning my phone from the bedroom. Maybe it is lowering the room temperature. Maybe it is starting a gratitude journal. Okay, so again, just fix on one thing, one specific thing, and to create a habit, you typically need several weeks. All right, so you want to give yourself a chance. Most people, you're not going to do it perfectly right off the bat. Guess what? That's life. You need to practice. So give yourself some grace and just keep trying. Now, you could have exercise. Maybe that really resonated with you and you're ready to do something about exercise. Again, just pick something relatively easy, you know, and schedule it. All right. Think about, you know, well, when's the time for myself? I know if I don't exercise, if I don't get my activity in the morning, my chances of doing it go down dramatically. All right. Because by the end of the day, of course, I'm tired. Things have come up during the day. Oh, you know, now I need to pick up my son, and oh, I have, you know, this came up with work and whatever. And oh, okay, well, I'll exercise tomorrow. Right. So you can keep those practical things in mind. Create some accountability. All right. And make it fun. All right. I know I've done things even during COVID. I was, and wintertime, I was walking on my treadmill in the house while I FaceTimed with somebody, or I was listening to an audiobook. All right. You want to keep yourself motivated. And then as far as the diet goes, again, don't try and do everything, change your whole diet all at once. It's like, pick one thing. I mean, when I gave my very first presentation, and this is like probably 7 years ago or so now, on food and your mood, there was a young lady there by the name of Joyce. And as I was talking about how carbs break down and, you know, how simple carbs will make your blood glucose spike and how that can create anxiety and depression, she recognized herself. She was a young mom. She had a toddler. And even before she had her son, she suffered from generalized anxiety. After her son was born, she had bad postpartum depression and she went back on her medication. And now she was pregnant with her second baby. And she was pretty concerned. She didn't want to be on medication during the pregnancy. And so she came to this talk and she realized, and these are her words, she says, I'm a carb junkie. because she'd be at home with her son and she'd be looking after him. And, little toddler, he was really busy. So she'd have a handful or two of dry cereal. She might have some pretzels. She had a fruit roll up, lots of simple carbs. Orange juice, she thought, oh, well, that's healthy. I'm going to have myself some orange juice. And she did that all throughout the day. And then it was only in the evening when her husband came home that they actually had like a regular meal and like vegetables and protein and stuff like that. And so the one thing she decided to do was to make sure she got protein with every meal. And she started looking at choosing, more complex carbs, more whole grains. And so, she started having, just whole grain toast with peanut butter for breakfast. She had some cheese and crackers for lunch, nothing too fancy. Celery with peanut butter. And then, she still had a regular meal at night. Well, within a couple of weeks, her anxiety level came way, way down. And I actually saw her. She signed up for a workshop that I did for 10 weeks. And so I saw her throughout the pregnancy, and she was in touch afterwards, didn't have postpartum depression, all because she changed her diet. All right. So it can have a big effect. And sometimes it's not even changing the food that you eat. It's like, maybe it's about awareness, it's like asking yourself, well, why do I want to eat? Because there's nutritional hunger, but you can eat when you're actually thirsty. Sometimes you're eating because, again, your blood sugar is going up and down and you're having blood sugar hunger. Sometimes it's emotional. So again, just tone it down, focus on one thing, all right? One thing, and just do it consistently, and then you'll see progress, okay? I mean, I've seen hundreds of people who take simple, consistent steps and who have made it work for themselves. So I'm at the end of the official part of my presentation, and I'm certainly open to questions here. I see Josh has written there if anyone has questions. So, okay, I have a question here that says, I drink 0 sugar, 0 caffeine Coke when I feel like something sweet. Is that helping or hurting? Well, that, I mean, really occasionally, all right? And I'm talking maybe once every few weeks. It's something that would probably be okay. The problem with artificial sweeteners that, like in the Coke Zero, is they actually do stimulate a bit of an insulin response, and they also affect your microbiome. They affect the healthy bacteria in your gut. And so in the longer term, um, it has a detrimental effect. If you want something sweet, the natural sweeteners, things like stevia or even xylitol, if you make yourself your own sweet tea, make some kind of fruit tea, let it cool, put a few drops of stevia in it, you can get something sweet that way that's still more natural. So I'd probably suggest, doing one more step in that direction. Okay, so next question here, it's what is meant by overcoming mental health? Is it no medications and balanced emotions? Well, again, in this day and age, mental health has almost become synonymous with mental illness. I like to talk about mental wellness, because really what that is about living with a sense of purpose, being able to feel some joy, being able to achieve some goals, have meaning in your life. And that can be, you don't necessarily need to be symptom free or completely healed. All right. you need to have some stability, but it's about being resilient enough to cope with whatever you need to deal with and still enjoy your life. All right. So there is a doesn't mean you can't be on medication or you can't be seeing a counselor or any of that stuff. But it does usually entail having some self-awareness and developing some good self-care skills for sure. So there's a thank you here, but no other questions that I can see. I don't know, Josh, is there anything that you wanted to say to
Yeah.
sum up or?
Is there any questions from the live audience? Yeah, we have one here. The question is, how many nuts are recommended to eat per day or a limit on that for health?
Usually we talk about a serving being about 30 grams. So think like a quarter cup, a couple of tablespoons. And you can have that. I mean, it's recommended at least 3 times a week. I haven't seen anything really against having that even every day. So yeah, I mean, if you're talking about healthy nuts, I'd stay away from kind of roasted and all kinds of flavored nuts because a lot of times the flavoring are artificial. So again, you're best to stick with raw, natural nuts and seeds.
The question is about hitting the snooze button. And sorry, what was the second part? If that's okay. Yeah, thoughts
Okay.
on that. I do
Okay.
that every morning. So
Yeah.
applicable.
Yeah. I mean, I think I certainly admit I do hit the snooze button most days. I think it's a question of, okay, is it you're hitting the snooze button like 3, 4, 5, umpteen times? That's really starting to imply to me that you're you're having trouble getting up, you're sleep deprived. Other things you can also consider that indicate sleep deprivation is, for example, if if you're quiet for anything, like let's say you're sitting down, you're watching TV, do you tend to nod off really easily, like 5 minutes and boom, you've fallen asleep? Or in a meeting at work, do you tend to be the one that's like, oh, you're falling asleep again? Um, Also, do you really have a craving to sleep in on the weekends? Because again, that's a sign that your body is wanting to catch up. And while it's certainly better than not catching up at all, ideally you want to keep your sleep routine stable. So adding more sleep during the week so that you can keep your wake up time steady is the ideal thing to do.
It was interesting. Like personally, guys, and for the live audience here, I went for counseling earlier this year for some like minor anxiety and depression that I was experiencing from COVID, from just some life situations and family stuff. And they recommended a lot of this stuff for the first session, and they asked me questions around sleep, nutrition, and diet and exercise. And I slowly started implementing new patterns, and it all went away. Like, and so I'm not like
Awesome.
here to offer my medical advice. I'm not qualified,
Yeah.
but I'm just saying, like, in my case, I'm a personal example that I didn't need medication. It was one session, practical things that
Mhm.
worked, and it got rid of it. So definitely think
Awesome.
it's worthwhile. And
Yeah.
but yeah, I think with timing, if you guys have any more questions from the live audience, oh, we have one more. Yeah, the question was watching TV before bed. If that's how that affects, because she was saying like how it can be relaxing for some people before going
Yeah.
to bed. Yeah,
Yeah,
some
it
thoughts
it
on that.
can be. I mean, I guess the type of programming is a factor, right? Because I mean, if you're watching a really stimulating action movie, probably not the best. If you're watching something calmer, the thing to watch is though, are you actually falling asleep in front of the TV and then waking up half an hour later? I personally I run into that issue not with the TV. I read, and if I'm getting tired, all of a sudden I'll notice, like, oh, okay, the book just hit me in the face. So I'll actually set a little timer, because I've from experience I'll know that, like, yeah, probably 10, 15 minutes will be it. You really don't want to have your sleep interrupted. So let's say, you're starting to fall asleep and then you wake up an hour later and then you need to get up and then go to bed, right? So having some kind of a backup in place so that you're not falling asleep, say, in front of the TV and then waking up later on and having to move and stuff. That's the only thing I'd be careful for. Plus, ideally, you don't want the TV in the bedroom. If it's in the living room and it's sort of a dimly lit room and the TV is a bit further away, some people I know watch it on their laptop, like right close up. I wouldn't recommend that.
Awesome. Does that help? Okay. Just for time's sake, guys, we will cut it off there. If there's any more questions from the online viewers, you can type them in the chat, and we'll figure out a way to send them on email, and we can figure that out after. Why don't we just give a clap? I don't know if you can hear it, Magda, but people are clapping here in person and online. Yeah, thank you again for your time. We really appreciate your
You're
really
welcome.
practical advice. I thought it was cool you mentioned a pager. Maybe some of us in this room are young enough to not even know what that is. But I know my friend's a med school student right now in her first year of residency, and she still uses a pager. So I think that's still a thing. But,
Yeah. They still use them. Wow.
yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Just as a reminder, we have 2 more events coming up for the Hub for May. May 12th, there's an eating disorder seminar, so that will be with a psychologist from Vancouver. She'll be here. And on May 19th, the week after, we have a personal trainer coming. He has a kinesiology degree from U of C. He'll be coming to chat more about practical on how to get involved more in fitness and that kind of thing in connection with mental health. So if you guys are interested on that, you can sign up online. Yeah, thanks again for coming, and thanks again, Magda, for your time tonight.
You're very welcome.
Get some
All right.
sleep.
Good night,
Sleep
everybody.
better. Yeah.
Okay.